my X feed now is just full of people that are onto Israel. And for me, it's very exciting and I'm
Yeah.
seeing it
Yeah.
and I'm all about this. Like
Right.
everybody's noticing. I'm just thinking about it constantly. But I know there's a lot of other things going on in the world. You
Right.
know, should I be focusing on this? What's the big,
Well, it is important. It is extremely important. I know that Alexander Mercouris always says that the battle that is determining the future of this planet is being fought in Ukraine, and he's probably right. But I think that's maybe something of a European perspective. Within the U.S., it's a little different, I believe, because Israel is much more important to the U.S. It's become a part of the U.S. in essence. It's become, embedded in our culture, in our government. It's the consequences of this war in Gaza and just in the Middle East in general is, I think, actually quite a bit greater for the U.S. than it is for Europe. I mean, it matters all around, but this is. So, in other words, for you to focus on Israel, to be obsessed with it, actually, you're kind of reflecting, again, the an American reality. I mean, this is something you're noticing something because other people are really noticing, and it really matters to them, and it's going to have consequences, political and cultural consequences, religious consequences. It's something that's really potentially can really shake up and change American society.
so what should we do now that we're noticing? Like, I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. It's just starting to spread like wildfire. Everybody is becoming aware, but should we be like calling our congressman? Should we, like, well, what is it that we can do to actually, if we are identifying a problem that Israel has become melded with the United States and we want to separate that, how do we go about doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, all those things are important. A certain amount of activism, calls and emails to congressmen, that kind of thing. But talking with friends, whatever you're good at, I think is what it is. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so I think we individually just have to decide what it is that we can do. Is something that we really care about? Yeah, we talk about it with friends and acquaintances. Maybe that's one thing. Family members, perhaps that doesn't work. You'll know from experience, but. Or you get online, so there are a lot of people who are just social media whizzes, and they can amplify this concern about Israel, through their online activities.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I've been doing. I've just been going through and liking everybody that is calling out Israel, pointing out these issues. But now my X feed, that's why it's completely that, because it almost feels like part of my duty that we're in this kind of war, and I need to keep on amplifying, like you said, these voices, pointing out the problems. And it's happening. It's happening in real time. And there's some big names really doing some great stuff. I mean, it's really been interesting watching Candace Owens. I used to always go to bed listening to Alexander Mercouris, and he'd put me to sleep. But recently I started listening to Candace Owens, and just because she's just doing basically the FBI's job, putting together this Charlie Kirk assassination stuff, building a timeline. And it's just wild. This whole thing is wild. It just, everybody's onto them. They're not getting away with it. So I just can't look away. I don't want to see what happens. Do you have any idea what's going to happen?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. This is like I've said, these kind of things are very, very hard to predict, but it's clear that the tide is turning against Israel. And, kind of at the opposite extreme of Candace Owens is The Economist, which is, a rather staid and really, historically not just historically, it is a neoconservative publication, one of the leading neoconservative publications that's been, in general, very, very supportive of Israel. And I saw just yesterday that they acknowledged, they did a poll together with YouGov and found, again, that the U.S. is really turning against Israel. They had noticed it in Europe already. They were seeing that. They were finding it, not just through polls, but just through conversations with friends. This is something people were changing their attitude towards Israel within Europe. But the U.S. was kind of holding out. There was still very strong support for Israel. But again, these journalists at The Economist, noticed that that was beginning to change. And the poll work that he did with YouGov was showing it. Just, give one example. Among, let's say, 50 and under Republicans are now evenly split between Palestine and Israel, which is a huge, huge difference. Like, again, you just go 5 years ago and they would have been overwhelmingly pro-Israel. And that was, I think Netanyahu and his people had seen even like 10 years ago that they were beginning to lose the left, and he just decided to really bank on the right, and now that looks like he's going to lose that too. So they're in trouble. Yeah, things are changing. They really are.
Well, as the support for Israel just collapses in this country, do you think that will make Israel more reckless, more likely to engage in something? Netanyahu will, I don't know, attack Iran, do something, because.
Well, yeah, I think the same kind of, he's operating really according to the same calculus that has caused him to take these reckless actions in the past. And they've actually, you have to admit, they have benefited him politically. First of all, there's the threat of the corruption trial. The charges have been brought against her, and he's being investigated for corruption. But because of these continual crises, which he himself is creating, he's able to pull out of these, or to inform the court that, sorry, I can't show up today because I have to attend to this crisis, and they accept it. It's happened again and again, and it's happened most recently with the Qatar attack, and now we have the Operation Gideon's Chariots too, and Gaza City. Just one thing after another keeps him out of this. So again, he still has that motivation. But more than that, a lot of these moves have been popular. Like his attack on Iran was very popular across the political spectrum. His attack on Doha in Qatar was popular. 75% of the population approved. And so, that hasn't changed. In the end, above all, he responds to, like any politician, the thing that matters most to him is domestic politics. And the domestic politics, I think, again, overall, though there is dissatisfaction, of course, about the hostage question, the majority are opposed to him on that, want to see a ceasefire. He can do all these other things, to maintain his popularity and maintain his hold on the government. And he will continue to do it. I think that's what we're seeing and what we will see.
You said bombing Doha, bombing Qatar, that was popular amongst.
Yeah.
Well, why? Why? Don't they understand that that's a big problem for them? Like, you don't want to make. Most people in the Middle East don't like you, and the ones that aren't openly resisting you are the ones that are being bought off by the United States. Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, these countries. You're supposed to be working with them, right? That's the whole arrangement. That's the idea. Why would they be happy?
Right. Yeah. The whole Abraham Accords idea. Qatar was kind of one of the ones next on the list. We already got the UAE. Mm-hmm. Bahrain. Now we can get Qatar, but now it's not going to happen. It just can't happen. I don't think so. But yeah, it's more than that. It's also the hostages, because everybody understands that the best way, really the only way at this point to get them released, or virtually the only way, is through some kind of ceasefire. And he goes and he attacks the negotiators. And he essentially just killed the possibility of a ceasefire for the foreseeable future.
Right.
And some of the hostage advocates and so-called hostage, I'm using their language. Most of them are prisoners of war. I think the vast majority of the remaining ones are. But their families, their advocates understood what happened, and they condemned the strike because they knew that was pretty much removed all hope of getting these people home, anytime in the foreseeable future. But most people don't think so much, including in Israel. And hey, we're bombing another country. Great. This is another success. Even though it was failed, he didn't get the Hamas leadership. He didn't get the negotiators, that he was trying to get. They still support it. There's just this reflexive support, for any kind of military action. And
I,
even when it's damaging to things that, they say that they're concerned about. I think there's just a lack of thought there. But that's the public.
don't you find that kind of surprising that Israelis are largely supportive of this? Because they have to understand that they need support from the United States. They need support from the West in order to survive. I'm sure they're aware of that. They know the amount of aid that we give them, that their military equipment, it all comes from the United States, virtually all of it. So why, I don't understand. Why would they still be supporting these actions even though they know that it's putting them in a very precarious position?
Yeah, well, I think maybe like Netanyahu himself, they just can't believe that the U.S. will stop supporting them. It's just been a fact of life in Israel for such a long time. I think you could go at least back to, the USS Liberty incident. It doesn't matter what we do. Like what the USS Liberty was just, attack on the U.S. Navy. And, or it was actually, an intelligence ship. It was an attack on the U.S. military, killing, 37, and very nearly sunk the ship. There could have been over 200 dead. That's what they were trying to do. And everybody who's looked into it carefully knows that that's what was happening. Yet, U.S. support for Israel only went up from there.
Right.
And so they just have this sense, this sense of impunity. We can do whatever we want. Okay, yeah, we can just, this is against U.S. interests. This is going to actually, the U.S. told us that they didn't want to see this happen, but we're going to do it because we know that they're going to back us.
Right, but that was
we've seen it again and again.
But that's 1967. There wasn't social media. People didn't know. That happened. They buried it, and they were able to bury it, and nobody was really aware of it. I mean, people are just discovering it now. Almost 60 years later. So it's just like if you're an Israeli and you want to travel, you're a small country. They like to go to Europe. And the United States, go to New York. Every time they travel now, they have to hide their citizenship, right? You're hated globally because everybody can see it because there's social media. It's not like, they did the USS Liberty attack and nobody figured out and they just could still go back and everybody's like, oh, great, you're Jewish and Israeli. That's wonderful. That's not happening anymore. Everywhere around the world, they want to go travel on vacation. They have to be worried. They have to be afraid. They have to be like, don't, unless they want to get in some type of confrontation with somebody. So doesn't that matter?
Yeah, no,
don't they care about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure some of them clearly do and are alarmed by it. But I guess others don't. I think, like maybe in the case of Netanyahu, he knows the risks, but he calculates them and he said, I got to stay in power and I got to, establish my legacy. I've got to defeat these, these foes of Israel and carry the greater Israel project forward. And yeah, there's a risk to it, but it has to be done. And then others probably just don't get it. They're still living in the past and they have the sense of impunity, which is, as you point out, is starting to disappear. I read this morning, this is a silly little example, but it was actually an Israeli a leftist Israeli that has taken part in anti-war protests. I don't know what nature, if they were, about the so-called hostages or about Palestinians. So I think the vast majority are actually about the hostages. But anyway, he's been part of the anti-war movement, such as it is within Israel. But he went with his family to a nudist colony in Greece. And even there, like you're up on this mountain by this waterfall, he got this hate because when people realized that he was Israeli, and he found it very distressing. And he had, I think in his defense, you have to say he understood why that was, but it was very distressing, And that's, so if you can't, that just kind of tells you can't go anywhere if you're an Israeli without risking, open denunciation.
Right. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But with Israeli society, if so many people are supportive of these actions and they are aware of it and they understand the global condemnation with it, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it. Like, it's hard for me to find any way to sympathize in any way with how they're feeling. I just don't understand the psychology behind that. If you can see what's happening. They know what's happening. They know that they're slaughtering these women and children there, and they're supportive of it. They know that everybody hates them, and whenever they travel anywhere, the people will shout at them and say, "Get out of here," And it's just, if you want to have any type of redemption, you have to, within Israel, you have to speak out against it, right? It's amazing to me that there's so few people within Israel that actually care about what the Palestinians, the Gazans. I mean, even if they don't care for it just morally, do you think they would do it just pragmatically, just because like, well, I need to do it so that way I can get support from the rest of the world, so that when this is all said and done, I can have a record and say, look, I was on the right side. Don't Nuremberg trial me, right? Even just to play it safe, if that's your only motivation, incentive. And it just amazes me that it's such a minority. Isn't that odd? I mean, I just don't think that would have ever happened. I mean, like in Nazi Germany, people weren't aware, of exactly what was going on. And I have a feeling if they did, many people would be horrified. I just don't understand what's happened to this society.
Yeah, well, I can't claim to understand completely myself, but I think part of it is actually this reflexive victim mentality, which has been fostered over the decades through Holocaust education and so on. This idea that we're eternally the victims. And it's almost, for a lot of them, they almost feel comfortable with it. Yeah, the world hates us. That's because, we're Jews and they're anti-Semites. And it's, the problem with that is it prevents any really, real reflection on what you're doing. It's self-criticism. It's just like you have this easy, ready-made answer that doesn't allow you to, introspect, but rather to point the finger at those anti-Semites out there. And I think that's a big part of the problem.
Okay, well, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that we're going to see an introduction of hate speech laws in this country? Because that's where I feel the next step is going to go. But the thing is, the Zionists in America, when they start to pull these levers, now that people are onto them, I think it's just going to have the opposite effect. Because I feel like it's coming. We saw Jimmy Kimmel got pulled, his show because he said something about Charlie Kirk. From my understanding, he wasn't even that egregious of a statement he made. But I have a feeling that the reason that they're doing this, because usually, Jimmy Kimmel's on the left and the media is largely on the left. And so you don't see them kind of going after these types of characters. But the fact that he's got fired, and we have JD Vance saying, employers should punish their employees that are speaking ill of Charlie Kirk, I think they're seeing Charlie Kirk's death as an opportunity to push in hate speech laws, because we'll say that, it's just so awful that if anybody criticizes his death. And then it's just a Trojan horse to put it in there and say, but, also you can't say that Charlie Kirk's death had anything to do with Israel, because that's what everybody is saying now online. And it's causing a huge problem. We don't know. We're still figuring it out, but I like that people are asking questions and investigating this. And, I have my suspicions. And so I want to see it play through. I want to see this happen. But it's scaring Israel. I mean, Netanyahu, everybody saw that video. How many heads of state have to go on air multiple times to say, by the way, I didn't kill that guy? It's nuts. Like, that's just not normal. Yeah. It's like, the lady don't protest too much, methinks,
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating phenomenon. First, about Jimmy Kimmel, I understand that actually what happened was that the head of the FCC threatened to pull the license of, I can't even remember what broadcasting company he worked for. Was it ABC?
I think it's ABC. I'm so bad with this stuff now.
Yeah, I think it was ABC, right? Yeah, so that really doesn't matter. But and because this was a Trump appointee, he was saying that this kind of statement clearly is not didn't meet some certain criterion of objectivity or balance or something, which seems ridiculous. You can't police individual statements, and it clearly is kind of just a politicized use of this regulatory body. Yeah, but it is worrying. First, I think I mentioned yesterday, like, it used to be that all these attacks were coming from the left, the vast majority, and directed at conservatives. I think that's just undeniable. That was it. So it seemed like this was the problem. And then the conservatives came into power. Trump took office, and saying that now, we're the free speech advocates. And then it turns out that no, they just turn around and they have their own definition of hate speech, which is, the so-called anti-Semitic speech. Really, it's criticism of the genocide, criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism, which is, I guess it shouldn't be just too surprising, but it is rather disappointing. It's like who was it that said, never let a good crisis go to waste? I think it was Rahm Emanuel. It's just like when there is a crisis and the kind of the political temperature shoots up, you've always had a plan, something you wanted to do. You just take advantage of that. You just kind of hitch your carriage to those horses and go with it. So yeah, everybody's upset about Charlie Kirk and about the so-called radical left, and now you have the right on your side, in favor of speech. These you could say anti-free speech laws, and so yeah, this is what you do, and then you join with them, but that the end result, when everything calms down, is now that you have a tool that you can use to go after critics of Israel. And there will be other, the thing is, it's going to go from the left to right. The right's not going to be in power forever. The left's going to be in there. They're going to be happy to have this tool to go after their right-wing opponents. I think we're seeing really kind of the beginning of the end of the whole ideal of American liberty. I think we really are going down that path now. It's not that free speech was somehow reasserted. It has just become, actually just a political weapon that's being used in this very polarized political landscape now.
Okay, well, that sounds a little scary. Do you think that they will actually be able to get away with that? What gives me hope with the pushing through a hate speech law is that the left isn't going to be on board with it. Just simply because it's the right. And also this is just wrong. But then I think amongst the right, I think you're going to have a split, because there were so many people on the right that were, like you said, were just all about free speech, saying that, no, you can't do that, no cancel culture, all this stuff. They will recognize the hypocrisy. Many of them will. And I see it online. It's like half of them will just, they just care about destroying the left. They don't have any critical thinking. It's just this stupid battle that they have in their mind. But I think there's enough people that are on the right that were free speech absolutists that will say like, hey, no, this is dangerous, and push back. And even Zionist people like Matt Walsh are saying that, like, oh, this is dangerous. So I don't think it would be successful. Do you, we're in a big battle.
You're probably right. There's just a danger. We'll see. I imagine that what will happen is this bill goes forward, whatever, is going to be worded in some very ambiguously so that it can be used in various ways. And it just there could be a bargain among devils here. It's like, we don't really care if you go after those people, as long as you give us an opportunity to go after them, people that could be sacrificed. Who knows, You're right. There are still principled free speech advocates, on the left and on the right. They do exist. And, they still represent, they're not an insignificant force. And there is a problem, again, right now. I think, a couple of years ago, the left would find it wonderful to have the First Amendment somehow restricted. I don't know how you could actually do that, but just say. But there was open talk on the left, like the First Amendment's a real problem. It's allowing all this fake news and these people to spread these false ideas. In other words, often ideas popular among conservatives. And now we're hearing something similar on the right. We can't protect hate speech. That was something that the leftists used to say. So are now the leftists going to flip flop? Yeah, probably. So maybe, and there still are the courts, that do by and large, defend the First Amendment. So the whole thing may fail. But, there's obviously pressure to do it. And I think, we see it happening regardless of changes in laws, like these firings. Some of them I can understand. I don't favor, I wouldn't call up anybody and say, fire this guy or whatever. That makes me uncomfortable, the whole thing. But some of the statements clearly were egregious and those people, if nothing else, deserve, social condemnation. But many of the statements were actually just it seemed to me like legitimate political speech. And it's maybe not something I agree with, but it wasn't, particularly hateful or anything. And there have been professors that have been fired and, all kinds of people who I think very unfairly have been dismissed from their jobs. And this is, it's a worrying trend. Again, this is something that we used to see happening, to conservative commentators in the past. Now we're seeing it happen to leftists, and I'm afraid, regardless of what happens in Congress, it looks like this is something we're going to see more and more of. We're just like the old, the idea of liberty is something, it's actually sort of a rather extraordinary ideal, that actually goes against human nature in so many ways. It's something that had to be built up over generations. Is that, okay, we may hate what you say, but we allow you to say it. That's actually not the way people, just like if you allow them to just go by their feelings and, their natural inclinations, that's not the way they go. It's like, I hate what you say and I'm going to shut you up. And I think that's what we're seeing, the kind of a reversion to our pre-liberty days.
Okay, so you think we're going to just see this kind of battle play out then? There will be attempts to, you think that's what they're going to try to do, to pass some type of hate speech laws? I mean, they're already doing it to some extent, right, with non-U.S. citizens. They deported all these students.
Right. Right. I think that, there will be attempts. We heard about that, even before the Charlie Kirk assassination. There was that, I think that measure introduced by MAST, right, to actually, I guess, empower the State Department to remove passports from people who are anti-Zionist. That could very easily be us.
Right.
I don't think it's going to get anywhere, but just the fact that there are being moves made in this direction is very, very worrying. And then even if the laws aren't passed, you can see that sometimes it doesn't matter. It's just like, people get fired, careers are destroyed. Maybe the legal architecture there is still there, the architecture that supports their free expression rights. But there are ways to punish people for free speech, outside of that.
Right. I think another thing that we might see is pressure being put on private companies, social media companies. I already think TikTok's been under a lot of pressure. And so I think we might see more censorship. I saw this on X. I don't know if it's true. I should have checked on YouTube, but I saw people saying on X that this interview with Charlie Kirk and Patrick Bet-David was removed off of YouTube. And it's one where Charlie Kirk was questioning what happened on October 7th and was asking, was there a stand-down order? He's saying that the story on October 7th doesn't make sense. And apparently they're trying to scrub that. And so,
oh, really?
Well, I don't know if they're trying to, I don't know if they're trying to scrub it. I shouldn't say, I just saw on X people saying that video has been removed by YouTube,
Yeah, I haven't heard that it's being removed. I actually did see clips of that video, and I think it was actually made October 23rd, just a couple of weeks after October 7th.
Yeah, he was. He had questions.
Yeah, so that actually shows that it was, he was having some questions, and he was willing to be critical of the Israeli government. Even not just in the last few months, as we've heard, but he did. Clearly he was asking some very hard questions and, very pointed questions about, October 7th. I found that very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard that it had been scrubbed. As far as TikTok, what the news is that a deal was made between the U.S. and China, and that the I guess an American company or companies, maybe a consortium of U.S. companies, would have a ruling stake in TikTok USA. But it sounded like, this is what I've heard. I don't, this was just one source. It would actually kind of give the control over, potentially give control over TikTok content to Larry Ellison of Oracle, who is a well-known, Zionist. And that could be very.
They're everywhere, man.
That's no, it's not a. Just go look up his biography. He's a Zionist. That's who he is. And it is Oracle, I think, would be the leading company. So that is worrying. And then I heard something kind of like you heard about YouTube, again, unconfirmed. It may not be true, that some videos were already taken down, or, whatever you call them in TikTok, the shorts or whatever that people watch there, some anti-Zionist ones. That may not be true, but, there's clearly a concern there.
Right. So I think this battle is going to heat up, as just the support begins to drop more and more. We're going to see them try to do more and more things to stop it. And I hope that they don't have enough control to stem that collapse, that it's going to have the opposite effect. Do you think it will? Do you think that their attempts to stop it?
I think you're right. I think he actually, they've lost control of it. They used to have control over the discourse. But that is gone. It's, in large part because of the changing media landscape, the rise of social media, and that's just much, much harder controlled. I mean, in the past you had the three major networks plus PBS, and then you had like 4 or 5 major newspapers, and and they were able to basically control, the information that Americans consume. That's just no longer true. It's just so easy to do and run around them now. So that's a big part of it. And then it's just the behavior, the conduct of Israel. I mean, it's just that it's gone so, it's become so egregious, and its ethnic cleansing campaign, its Greater Israel Project has become so obvious. It was always there for somebody who really wanted to pay attention, but you had to do some research. Maybe you had to even buy a book. Like I remember buying a book about in the 1980s that really opened my eyes to it. Now you don't, a few clicks and you just start to say, wait a second, what's going on here? And you see the images you see. And so, yeah. And again, it's just like, it's not that, again, it's a combination of the new media landscape that allows us to see what's really going on if we're willing. And then, the changed, the new spirit in Israel that's just so reckless and just doesn't seem to, to a great extent, doesn't seem to even care what the rest of the world thinks about it. The old Israel did terrible things, but they cared and they were careful, and they occasionally apologized and pulled back. All those things happened. It just doesn't happen anymore.